What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some highlights for the Steam Next Fest, which I think you would be forgiven for overlooking if you're unaware that it started on June 10th, yesterday from the time of this video, and is running through June 17th. But given all of the announcement shows and everything going on, I think it's not unreasonable that people may have been unaware. But given that this Steam Next Fest, because it coincides with those shows probably, actually also brings us a few demos from some of the recently announced titles, or at least recently discussed titles thanks to those showcases. So I want to talk about a few of those and a few other demos that I just thought were particularly cool or interesting, though do keep in mind that Steam Next Fest is a celebration of like thousands of indie games. In this case, I believe it's like 1,700, so I couldn't possibly take a look at all of them. So do absolutely let me know down below if you played any that are particularly cool, or that you enjoyed that I didn't cover here. But with that exact thing in mind, let's jump right into it with Flintlock Siege of Dawn. Now this is a game I've thought looked pretty cool for a couple years since it was announced really, so it's been a little bit behind, but it's finally got a release date of just next month in July, and they have put out a demo obviously for the Steam Next Fest. And I've got to tell you, it's a fantastic demo, like surprisingly good, better than I thought it was going to be, and I'm planning on reviewing this already. So much so that I'm likely going to do a video just on it a little later this week, but the combat feels great, the movement feels really good, it discusses some of the elements around the story, that is to say, the general premise is that remnants of humanity here are fighting against the dead who are just pouring into the realm, and even that looked really cool. I was very impressed with this demo. You should absolutely check this one out for yourself if you want to, but in general it kind of has like some God of War type elements where it's very action combat oriented, and over on the Steam page it actually has a Souls-like tag, but I didn't really get that impression from what I played here, but either way, really loved this one. Speaking of Souls-likes though, the next one I want to mention is one I've already talked about a bit, which is Enotria: The Last Song, which is a Souls-like rooted in Italian folklore where you play as a puppet in a world that is set in stasis, doomed to replay this play that everyone has a part in. You, however, do not, so your job is to go through and essentially change this, and we're going to do that naturally through Souls-like methods of beating everything to death. Now, this demo, while a little bit clunky and definitely needs some shader work because of the Unreal stutter associated with that, was otherwise also pretty enjoyable. It has a system of abilities that you'll be able to use and different sort of masks you can put on your character, which changes their stats and things, which combined with their weapon makes a sort of loadout. And you can actually set up a few of these to switch between on the fly outside of the rest points. And I enjoyed what I experienced of this. And what's more, this game is also releasing relatively soon in about mid-September. So if you want to check this one out, that's a great opportunity to do so. But then third up on the list, we have the Once Human demo. Now during the showcase, this was announced, and I mentioned personally in my highlights video that the fact that it is a multiplayer thing kind of puts me off a little bit from it personally, and after trying the demo, I would say that remains true. But Once Human is about meta-humans who are trying to survive the Stardust, as it's called. Stardust has effectively turned humanity into monsters, and there was a bunch of research done to prevent this, which resulted in the meta-humans. Meta-humans are resistant to the Stardust themselves, but obviously it still poses a certain amount of danger to them. But the main thing I love about this game is actually just the sort of sci-fi vibe it's going for. It's got an incredible bit of atmosphere, but it is also sort of a survival crafting style action shooter, where we're going to be building up a base and doing a whole lot of crafting to set up our area in the world. So for me at least, this is a case of a game that I absolutely love the vibe of, but the actual gameplay elements aren't really for me. But that brings us to, I would say, things on the smaller indie side of the Next Fest, which also has some pretty good games, but the first one I want to highlight is Kill Knight. Honestly, a pretty simple game premise-wise. It is a sort of arcade-inspired isometric shooter where we're going to be fighting off just hordes and hordes of minions across a few different arenas. And as we do this, we'll earn materials that we can then use to upgrade and allow ourselves to get different weapons from. But the actual gameplay here and mastering the abilities of our Kill Knight, who happens to be a corpse resurrected into this armor, I believe, is going to do its best to absolutely wipe out all of these minions using the various tools at your disposal, which basically comes down to a lot of like perfectly timed attacks. Ideally, for instance, when you reload, there's a small timer that if you hit the button at the right time, you reload faster and start shooting faster afterwards. As you pick up drops from enemies as you go, you increase your kill power, which makes you even more deadly and able to take on further enemies. So not a particularly complicated game overall, but I still thought it was pretty neat. Next up on that front, however, we have a Kriegsfront, or Kriegsfront Tactics to give it its full name. And this is a TRPG set in a alternative 1970s, specifically in Southeast Asia. However, this time around, we're going to be building out a squad of mechs and taking them on, of course, battles. And what I played of it was pretty fun. It's my understanding that in the full version of the game, you'll be able to customize your mechs and sort of gear out your team appropriately and then use that setup to go against other teams of mechs and the like in your tactics-based missions. So overall, a pretty neat little idea. I enjoyed what I played of it. Though I will say tactics-wise, while I didn't really get a chance to play it for myself, I also saw another one called Metal Slug Tactics that looked really fun. So if you played that one, do let me know how you feel about it. Second to last, however, we then have Beyond These Stars, which I thought was a really interesting little city builder that takes place on the back of a space whale. In this game, humanity has been struggling with these giant space whales destroying and eating planets. You land on the back of one in an attempt to do some research to obviously try to stop this, only to find yourself stranded here, which means you have to manage your resources and grow your population and things in order to try to just survive mostly, but also to do something about this. And what's really cool about this is actually that the ecosystem of the back of this space whale is pretty delicate. You'll have to manage things like pollution and whatnot as you try to stretch the flow of this river to expand the livable area on this thing's back. And apparently, once you get far enough, you can build a research station that will allow you to try to communicate with the whale, which I thought was a neat little touch. And while I'm not generally into city builders a ton, I did like this one. I thought it was pretty cool. But that brings us to our last entry here for this highlights video, and that is another game I've covered a little bit already, which is Mirthwood. Mirthwood is a game that's kind of in the line of games like Stardew Valley, would be the easiest comparison, but it takes on a slightly more mature tone despite the art style. There's a fair bit of death in this one, things like executions, bandits, thieves, etc., and there is a little bit of low fantasy, I believe, as well. One of their previews on their Steam page shows a werewolf, but it's a game that seems to mix a fair bit of combat and exploration with the standard like town of dedicated NPCs that have their own little simulation going on that you can interact with, romance certain characters even, so it looks like a really fun life sim sort of game. And given that this game at the very least lets you be a little bit more of a bad guy than this genre of games tends to allow for, makes me interested in it, admittedly. As something about life sims always just makes me really want to be like the worst neighbor possible to these people, and I hope Mirthwood manages to deliver on that front, but it is a pretty fun game from what I've experienced. However, that is pretty much what I've got to show you for today in terms of this highlights video. I certainly hope you enjoyed it, but do remember there is a ton more games involved in the Steam Next Fest than this, and if you have played any that I didn't mention here, I'd love to hear about them, as I'm always on the lookout for new games, of course, which naturally means to like, comment, and subscribe. But all of that aside, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.